The darkness inside the shattered cave felt heavier than the night itself. A single trembling flashlight beam cut across the jagged ceiling, revealing dust drifting in the hot, suffocating air. Outside, artillery thumped somewhere beyond the limestone ridges of southern Okinawa. Inside, wounded civilians and soldiers lay shoulder to shoulder against the rock walls, their groans rolling like a low tide through the cavern. On a wooden evacuation board, cleared in haste, a young Japanese woman gripped the splintered edge with both hands. Sweat drenched her thin dress. Every few seconds, a contraction wrenched through her, bending her spine, pulling a strangled cry from her throat. "Don't close your legs, Michiko. Listen to me." The voice was urgent, firm, unmistakably American. Captain Thomas F. McDowell leaned over her, the harsh cone of light catching the blood streaks on his once white medical coat. Around Michiko's wrist was a makeshift POW tag written in shaky handwriting. Hayashi, Michiko, age 24. He had written 7 months, malnourished, high risk on her intake card hours earlier. Now it was June 1945, and she was in labor far too soon, inside a cave that had barely stopped shaking from the bombardment. A contraction hit like a blow. Michiko's breath shattered. Her vision blurred to white. "It hurts. I can't, please," she whispered, reaching blindly for something, anything, until her fingers caught his sleeve. McDowell pressed his gloved hand against her shoulder. "Look at me, Michiko. In through your nose. Out through your mouth. When I tell you to push, you push. Your baby is early and weakening." She tried to focus on his face, seeing only fragments: the tight jaw, the tired eyes, the gray at his temples. The cave tilted around her. The flashlight beam dipped lower, catching the soaked fabric beneath her hips. The dress had turned nearly black with blood. "Scissors," McDowell ordered. A corpsman sweating, helmet askew, slapped the instrument into his hand. McDowell spoke low, calming. "I'm cutting the dress to see better. Only the fabric. Stay with me." He pinched the blood-stiffened cotton and cut a narrow slit, peeling the heavy cloth aside just enough for the light to reach. The blanket underneath was a dark, spreading mess. He swallowed, a flicker of fear climbing his throat, and set to work. 31 weeks. Too small, he muttered. Another contraction tore through Michiko. Her back arched off the board, heels sliding helplessly across the wood. She clung to the edge so hard, splinters bit into her palms. "Now," McDowell said. "Push. Right now." Her scream filled the cavern, raw enough that 2 civilians turned their heads. Outside, another shell landed somewhere along the ridge, like the island itself answering her. Michiko pushed until sparks burst behind her eyes. Days of hiding in the caves, weeks of hunger, fear, and exhaustion crushed into one desperate effort. Her world shrank to pressure, pain, and the doctor's voice cutting through it. Then release. A sudden, slippery shift of weight. She collapsed backward, gasping. Between her knees lay a body impossibly small, bluish, limp, silent. The baby did not cry. The corpsman whispered, "God, she's tiny." McDowell didn't waste a second. He cleared the airway, suctioned what little he could, then lifted the fragile chest so light he felt the bones like twigs under his gloves. "Flashlight here." The beam steadied on the infant's face. Still no movement. He sealed his mouth over the tiny one and breathed carefully, rhythmically. Then he listened with his stethoscope. A flutter, weak, uneven, barely there. "Come on," he murmured. "Come on, little one." Behind him, Michiko tried to lift her head. The cave walls swayed sideways. Voices drifted as if down a long corridor. Her legs felt distant, numb. Someone said, "The bleeding isn't stopping," but the words floated away before she could grasp them. She opened her eyes once more. In the swaying light, she saw only pieces. The curve of the baby's skull in McDowell's palm, his shoulders rising and falling as he breathed for her child, the scissors lying forgotten on the board. "It hurts," she whispered, though her voice barely rose above the distant thunder of artillery. "I can't." But the pain was fading, replaced by a cold, crawling numbness, lifting her off the board and sinking her into darkness. The last sound she heard clearly was the faint heartbeat echoing inside the stethoscope, so thin it might have been hers, or the child's, or both. Then everything slipped away. When Michiko Hayashi lost consciousness on that rough wooden board inside the Okinawa cave ward that night, no one, neither the exhausted corpsman nor Captain Thomas F. McDowell, with his ear pressed to the tiny chest, knew whether a 138-kilogram baby would live long enough to greet the sunrise. 3 days before the birth, Michiko Hayashi had still been trying to hide her pregnancy. She had hidden it under her oversized civilian nurse uniform, under layers of exhaustion, under fear. A midwife turned wartime assistant, she had worked at a field station near Shuri until her hands trembled every night. But no one knew she was 7 months along. They couldn't know. If they did, she would be cast out, left behind, declared a burden. Then Shuri collapsed. The retreat began violently and without warning. A single order tore through the aid station like a blade. "Fall back to the southern caves." Officers shouted, pushing civilians, clerks, wounded soldiers, students, everyone toward the ridges. Smoke blotted out the sun. Artillery carved open the sky. Every explosion felt closer than the one before. Michiko moved with the crowd, one hand pressed to her belly, the other clutching her satchel. Children stumbled. Women cried. Soldiers limped with vacant eyes, rifles dragging against the stones. A woman carrying a toddler whispered, "How far?" "I don't know," Michiko said. "Just keep walking." Pain pulsed low in her abdomen. A pressure she recognized, unwelcome and unmistakable. She prayed it was strain. Stress. Not labor. Not now. Not here. By dusk, the stream of fleeing civilians merged with retreating soldiers. Both were herded toward the same cavern system near Mabuni, the last defensive line. A jagged maw of limestone swallowed the crowd, its entrance lit by flickering lanterns and smoke. At the mouth of the cave stood armed guards, creating a tight bottleneck. One soldier's gaze snapped to Michiko's abdomen. "You. How many months?" Her breath stopped. 5, she lied softly. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You're lying. Women ready to give birth don't stay. Go to the drainage tunnel." Less space wasted there. "She's a nurse," a girl behind Michiko protested. "They need her inside." "Sevens," the soldier's fear spilled into anger. "No babies," he snapped. "No crying. No weakness. The Americans are closing in. She leaves." Another contraction struck. Michiko bent forward, gripping the rock wall. The soldier's face twisted. "Out. Move." She was shoved aside toward a narrow fissure half collapsed, nearly pitch black. She stumbled, almost falling, catching herself on the stone. A teenage private no older than 17 slipped beside her. His uniform was torn, soot streaking his cheeks. "Come," he whispered urgently, guiding her into the fissure. "If you stay in the open, you'll be shelled. Hide here. When the officers switch, slip inside with the others." "Why? Help me," Michiko asked shakily. For a moment, his face softened, revealing someone who still remembered tenderness. "My sister was pregnant last winter," he murmured. "She didn't make it. No one helped her." Before she could answer, he vanished back toward the entrance. Michiko crouched alone, pressing both hands to her belly. The air was stale, thick with cordite and sweat. Farther in, she heard murmured prayers, shuffling bodies, and the muffled sobs of mothers trying to silence their children. When enough movement swirled through the entrance an hour later, she quietly slipped into the main cavern. The darkness swallowed her, another shaking body among hundreds pressed together. No one noticed, one more frightened woman. Hours passed. Contractions returned, irregular but persistent. She bit her lip to keep quiet. Her dress clung to her damp skin. The cave ceiling trembled each time artillery struck above them. Dust drifted down like ash, coating hair and shoulders. By the time the second night fell, panic spread. The Americans are on the ridge closer. Keep the lanterns dim. Silence the children. Sevens. The third morning came with choking heat. Michiko woke in a daze, her limbs heavy. The pressure in her belly was sharper now, deeper, more rhythmic. She tried to breathe slowly, telling herself she had hours. Maybe days. But the contractions were real, and they were coming closer together. Then the shell hit. A thunderclap ripped through the cavern. The ground heaved. Stone cracked. Lanterns fell and shattered in sparks. Screams tore the darkness. Michiko threw herself against the wall just as the entrance collapsed in a roaring avalanche of rock. Dust exploded through the cavern like a living storm. When the echoes faded, the world seemed to shrink into suffocating silence. Someone sobbed. The exit. It's gone. We're sealed in. Another voice cried. We're trapped, God. We're trapped. Michiko's ears rang. Her lungs burned with dust. Then a warm rush spilled between her knees. Her water broke. She looked down, heart lurching. No. Please. Not now. Contractions gripped her abdomen like merciless fists. The air was too thin. The darkness too deep. The space too crowded with fear. She pressed her palm against the stone, feeling it shake with another distant barrage. The cave held barely. She was sealed inside a tomb with a child who refused to wait. And labor, real labor, had begun. Darkness swallowed the cavern after the entrance collapsed. Dust hung in the air like a thick, choking fog, turning every breath into work. When the last stones settled, the screams quieted into a terrified hush broken only by sobbing children and the hollow drip of groundwater down the walls. Michiko Hayashi pressed her palm to the stone, trying to steady her breath. Her water had broken moments earlier. The warm slickness still clung to her thighs, turning cold in the heavy air. A contraction clenched her abdomen sharp, deep, impossibly early. She folded forward, swallowing a cry. Not now. Not like this. Someone nearby whispered, We're trapped. The air... God, the air is already thinning. Farther in the cavern, a man muttered prayers under his breath. Another argued that they should dig the entrance out. A voice snapped back that American flamethrowers were sweeping the ridge if they made noise. They'd burn alive. Michiko barely heard them. She braced both hands on her knees, forcing her breath to stay slow. She had coached other women through labor. She knew what to do. But nothing she'd ever learned could prepare her for this, the suffocating heat, the stench of unwashed bodies, the press of hundreds of people packed into one chamber of rock. A girl beside her touched her arm. Are you hurt? Michiko hesitated. Admitting labor meant panic. Panic meant being pushed aside or worse, silenced. I'm fine, she lied. Another contraction surged. Pain knifed through her spine. The girl's eyes widened, but she didn't speak. Instead, she gently helped Michiko curl into a shadowed corner beside a cluster of women and children. Dust coated Michiko's tongue as she breathed. Her chest ached with each inhale. The air was too warm, too damp, too still. Already the cave felt smaller. Minutes dragged like hours. The third contraction nearly buckled her. She clutched the wall, nails scraping stone. Her breath tore out in gasps. "You're in labor," the girl whispered. "Too early," Michiko managed. 7 months, maybe less. The girl's expression fell. Everyone in Okinawa knew what happened to babies born in caves. They rarely lived long, and mothers bled out without medicine, light, or clean water. "Try to rest," the girl murmured. But rest was impossible. Sweat slid down Michiko's temples. Her dress stuck to her back. Sparks danced in her vision. Somewhere deeper in the cavern, a baby began wailing, only to be quickly muffled. Soldiers shouted at the mother to make it stop. "We'll all die if they hear us," one hissed. The crying faded into tiny hiccups. Michiko closed her eyes. She listened to the air thick, heavy, moving less and less. Multiple bodies exhaling in a sealed space consumed oxygen faster than she'd expected. In training, she had learned how quickly air in an underground chamber turned stale. Hours passed. People grew sluggish. Someone near the entrance collapsed from heat or shock. A boy fainted. The smell of sweat, urine, and fear intensified. Michiko tightened her jaw as another contraction carved through her. They were coming faster now. She curled her hand around the small pendant hidden under her collar, the only thing she carried from home. Her husband Kenji had given it to her before deployment. She had no idea if he was alive. She hadn't seen him since early spring, before the American landing tore through Oroku Peninsula. The pain swelled again. She clenched her teeth, but a soft whimper escaped. "Here." The girl pressed a cloth into her hand. "Bite down on it." Michiko obeyed, muffling her sounds. She could hear murmurs around her, fearful, resigned. "She won't make it. Too early. No doctor. God have mercy." She ignored them, pressing her forehead to her knees. The contraction passed. Her breath rushed out. Fatigue washed over her like a tide. She trembled from the effort of staying silent. Her skin felt too hot, then too cold. She realized with a sinking gut that she was already losing strength. When the next wave hit, sharper than before, her vision blurred. She bit the cloth hard, breathing through it. The girl steadied her shoulders, whispering, "You can do it. Just keep breathing." But Michiko knew the truth. This cave could kill them both before sunrise. She needed air. She needed light. She needed someone who knew what to do. Someone like... No. There was no one. Another contraction ripped through her midsection. She folded forward, gripping the ground. Her nails scraped stone. She tasted blood in her mouth. A distant rumble shook the cave, another barrage landing on the ridge. Dust rained from the ceiling in a thin veil. People cried out. A lantern flickered weakly, half smothered by the stale air. The cave was dying, and she was running out of time. Her abdomen tightened again, stronger, deeper. She gasped. Even the girl holding her looked frightened now. "Michiko," she whispered. "Your body's starting. You can't stop it." Michiko pressed a shaking hand to her belly. She felt the next contraction gather like a storm. "I won't survive here," she whispered. The girl squeezed her arm. "Then we pray." Michiko bowed her head as the darkness shuddered around them, and the cave breathed its hot, dying breath over both mother and child, while labor tightened its merciless grip. By the second night, the cave had turned into a dying lung. The air barely moved, hot, stale, too heavy to breathe. Lantern flames flickered weakly, starving for oxygen. People no longer sat upright. They slumped against one another, drifting in and out of a half-consciousness. Michiko drifted with them. Every contraction dragged her back into pain. Every lull pushed her closer to blacking out. Aya, the 17-year-old student nurse, stayed at her side. One hand on Michiko's back, one ear tuned to the cave, one eye watching the thinning air. "How far apart?" she whispered. Michiko swallowed. "I can't count anymore." The contractions were minutes apart now. Sweat ran down her spine. Her dress clung to her thighs. Her breath rasped like sand through cloth. Somewhere deeper, someone retched. A child whimpered. The cave echoed each noise like distant thunder. A contraction hit. Sharp. Deep. Unmerciful. Michiko bent forward, clutching Aya's sleeve. Aya steadied her, voice soft but command steady. "Lean into it. Don't fight the pain. You'll burn out too fast." Another rumble shook dust from the ceiling. Not artillery. Something closer. Heavier. Aya tensed. That wasn't the ridge. Before she finished, a violent blast hit the entrance. Boom! Stone screamed. Pebbles rained. Women cried out as the ground heaved. A lantern toppled, sputtering in the choking heat. People scrambled toward the back, terrified of fire. Others whispered frantic prayers. A second shockwave came closer yet. Then a third. The sound reverberated through bone. "They're blasting," a soldier hissed. "They're trying to open the cave. Or collapse it," someone shouted back. Before panic could take over, a sharper crack split the darkness. A fracture tore through the rubble at the entrance. A faint thread of cooler air slipped in. Not wind, just a suggestion of it, but enough to stir hope like a spark. People gasped. A few reached toward the crack as though it were salvation. Michiko felt it too, a thin breath across her cheek. Her lungs expanded for the first time in hours. Her vision brightened. And then a contraction smashed her breath apart. She doubled over, hands clawing at the ground. Aya gripped her shoulders. "Michiko, stay with me." "I can't," Michiko whispered. "You must." Her body trembled violently. Pain radiated through her pelvis. Her knees buckled. Another distant blast. Dust surged into the chamber like smoke. Then voices. Muffled, but unmistakably American. A loudspeaker crackled somewhere beyond the rubble. "Come out with your hands up. We will not shoot civilians." The words echoed strangely through the stone. Then came a broken Japanese translation from an interpreter outside. "Civilians, come out slowly. We do not harm you. Hands visible." People froze. Somewhere near the front, a Japanese soldier hissed. "If anyone runs out first, they'll think we're combatants. Wait for the white cloth. Do not move." Fear rippled through the cavern. Mothers held their children tight. Men pressed their backs to the walls. The faint crack of light at the entrance widened only a sliver, barely enough to see fingers reaching toward it from outside. The cave was opening, but slowly, painfully slowly. Michiko's breath hitched. Another contraction surged from spine to belly. Aya whispered, "Don't push yet. Hold on just a little longer." Michiko tried. She bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. The world swam. Heat shimmered. The cave spun around her. Then the next contraction hit, massive and crushing. Her body seized. Her vision grayed. Her knees gave out altogether. "Aya," she gasped, but the word wasn't fully formed. Aya caught her under the arms, lowering her carefully. "Stay awake. Michiko, look at me." But Michiko couldn't. Her limbs felt like wet sand. Her eyelids too heavy. Her breath too shallow. The blade of light grew another inch. Shouts from outside sharpened. The rumble of stone being pried away filled the chamber. But all Michiko saw was a blur of brightness and silhouettes, the outlines of helmets, rifles, and reaching hands. Then her vision folded inward. Her last awareness was of Aya's voice, small, urgent, breaking. "Hold on. You're almost out, just hold on." But Michiko's body had reached its limit. 3 days without air. 3 days without food. 3 days of labor, starting too soon. Her head fell sideways against Aya's shoulder. She exhaled once, soft and defeated. And as the cave finally cracked open to daylight, and American hands reached in to pull civilians out. Michiko Hayashi slipped into unconsciousness, her baby still trapped inside her body, coming faster than rescue could dig. When Michiko collapsed, Aya screamed for help, but her voice was swallowed by chaos. The cave entrance finally broke open enough for light to stab inside, though dust still churned in the air. American voices shouted orders. Civilians shielded their eyes. Japanese soldiers held out white cloths to show surrender. Amid the stumbling crowd, 2 Marines saw Aya struggling to hold up a limp woman. One knelt. "She's going down. Get her out, now." The other slung his rifle behind his back. "I got her." Aya grabbed at his sleeve, forcing the English words out between gasps. "Pregnant. Baby coming. Too early. Please." They did not understand every word, but they understood her eyes and the blood pooling between Michiko's legs. The Marine lifted Michiko carefully, one arm under her knees, one behind her back. She was frighteningly light. Her head fell against his shoulder, skin burning with fever and exhaustion. "She is hot," he muttered. "Real hot. Move fast." Outside, daylight was harsh and colorless. The ridge was a broken world of blasted rock, charred roots, and bodies covered with tarp sheets. Smoke drifted from smoldering brush. The smell of gunpowder, burned earth, and blood lay over everything. The Marines carried Michiko toward a rough field station where medics from the 7th and 96th Divisions had laid out triage lines. Crates served as tables. Tarps served as roofs. The ground was rubble and mud. Wounded civilians and soldiers lay in rows, sorted by urgency. Corpsmen moved quickly, shouting vital signs. A young medic saw them coming. "Critical inbound. Make space." They lowered Michiko onto a wooden door used as a stretcher. Aya followed, still clutching her hand. A corpsman took one look at the soaked cloth and the swollen curve of her abdomen. "She is in labor," he said. "Way too early. And losing blood." "Where is McDowell?" Someone yelled. Another voice answered. "At the burn cases by the supply crates." "Go get him. This one is bad." Across the makeshift yard, Captain Thomas F. McDowell was tightening a bandage around a Marine's charred forearm. His coat was stiff with dried blood. His eyes were ringed with sleepless shadows. When he heard his name and the word pregnant, his hands paused only a second before he tied off the knot and stripped off his gloves. "What is it?" he asked, already moving. "Japanese civilian. From the cave." "She is crashing, sir." He grabbed a fresh pair of gloves from an open crate and jogged after the corpsman. When he reached the stretcher, he stopped just long enough to take in the scene. A Japanese woman, mid-20s, skin ashen, hair plastered to her face with sweat, blood between her thighs. Abdomen still rounded, the baby not yet born. "Who is she?" he asked. Aya answered immediately, voice shaking. "Hayashi Michiko. Civilian nurse. 7 months. 3 days in cave. No food. No air." McDowell pressed 2 fingers to Michiko's neck. Her pulse fluttered, weak and fast. He looked at the corpsman. "She is hanging by a thread." He laid a hand on her abdomen. The baby was low. Too low. There was no time to wait for a proper ward or better conditions. "Get her inside the tent," he ordered. "Bring towels, boiled water if you have it, saline if there is any left. Bring the obstetric kit we salvaged yesterday." 2 medics lifted the stretcher. Aya stayed close, refusing to let go of Michiko's wrist. McDowell walked beside them, counting the pulse he could barely feel. Inside the canvas tent, the light dimmed to a warmer glow from a single lantern. Heat pooled under the sagging roof. The air smelled of sweat, iodine, and ether. They set Michiko down on a crate propped level with empty ration boxes. McDowell moved fast. Temperature is high. She's dehydrated. Blood pressure is dropping. She's been in labor too long, he said. His voice stayed calm, but his jaw clenched. She might not survive this. Aya swallowed hard. And the baby? He did not answer at first. He checked dilation, palpated gently. The baby was small. The bones under his fingers felt delicate and fragile. Very early, he said softly, but still alive, for now. He leaned close to Michiko's face. Michiko, he said firmly. If you can hear me, you are in an American field hospital. I am a doctor. I am going to help you. Your baby needs you to fight. Her eyelids fluttered once. A sound came from deep in her throat. No word, only pain. Good, he murmured. Stay with me. The next contraction rolled through her body. Even unconscious, her muscles tensed, back arching. A broken moan escaped her lips. McDowell steadied her hips, nodding to Aya. When the contraction comes, you support her shoulders. Do not let her slide off. Keep her centered. Aya wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and nodded. I will. Outside, artillery thudded far along the coast, distant but constant. Someone shouted for morphine. Someone else called for more stretchers. The war did not pause for one birth. McDowell drew a slow breath, forcing his mind into the narrow tunnel where only the mother and child existed. All right, he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. We do this now. He looked at Aya. Be ready. The lantern flame shivered. Michiko's body tightened again, violent and uncontrollable. Her baby was coming into a broken world. And in the middle of rubble and gunfire, an American doctor committed himself to pulling 2 lives back from the edge, enemy or not. The triage tent felt too small for what was about to happen. Heat clung to the canvas like a second skin. The lantern above them hissed unevenly, its flame trembling as if it sensed the urgency gathering in the air. Outside, boots scraped across rubble and corpsmen barked orders, but inside this circle of light, everything tightened around one woman and one unborn child fighting against the odds. Michiko barely drifted in and out of consciousness. Her eyelids fluttered weakly. Her breath came in shallow, trembling pulls. Sweat soaked her hair, making it cling to her cheeks. Aya knelt at her side, whispering soft Japanese words that sounded like prayers. McDowell checked her dilation again and glanced at Aya. She is almost there, but she is dangerously weak. Aya nodded, wiping Michiko's face with a damp cloth. What do we do? We help her through the next few minutes. Nothing else matters. A corpsman returned carrying a tin basin of hot water. Steam curled upward, fogging McDowell's glasses. He wiped them quickly on his sleeve, leaving faint streaks, then set the basin aside along with 3 thin towels worn nearly threadbare. He pulled on a clean pair of gloves. Michiko, he said, leaning close, your baby is coming. You must stay with us. Her lips moved, but no sound escaped. A new contraction seized her body. Michiko arched off the stretcher with a low moan, her hands clenching at the air. Aya braced her shoulders, whispering, breathe. Just breathe. McDowell positioned himself, eyes sharp. The baby was crowning, but slowly, with trouble. Head is visible, he murmured. But small. Premature. The next contraction began, weaker than he hoped but steady. He guided gently with his fingers. The head slipped forward, wet and fragile under his touch. Then he paused. The umbilical cord circled the tiny neck once, tight enough to restrict movement. Aya's breath hitched. Is that dangerous? It can be, McDowell said. Hold her steady. He slid a gloved finger under the slippery cord. The cord resisted a moment, slick with blood and fluid, then loosened. He guided it carefully over the infant's head, freeing the airway. Another contraction. There was no strength behind it. He worked with practiced precision, supporting the small shoulders as they rotated. The baby's skin was slick, almost impossible to hold. For a terrifying moment, his fingers slipped on the tiny underarm. He tightened his grip and pulled gently downward. This time, the shoulders came free. The rest of the body slid into his hands, limp and frighteningly light. Too light. Aya leaned forward. Is she? McDowell looked down at the newborn. Skin bluish. Limbs still. Chest unmoving. No cry. No sound. Silence filled the tent. A heavy, suffocating silence that felt more terrifying than artillery. He laid the baby on a towel and moved with calm urgency. He tapped the soles of her feet. No response. He rubbed her back briskly with the cloth. Still nothing. Aya covered her mouth. She is not breathing. Doctor, she is not. I know, he said quietly. He cleared the infant's mouth with his little finger, then used a narrow glass pipette as a suction tube. A few bubbles of fluid came up. Still no movement. He leaned down, sealing his mouth over the tiny one. He breathed once, gentle but firm. Warm liquid touched his lips, the metallic taste of blood and amniotic fluid mixing on his tongue. He breathed again. Again. He lifted his head and pressed the stethoscope to the tiny chest. He listened. Nothing. He closed his eyes. He breathed again, slower, more controlled. On the fourth breath, he felt it. A flutter. Weak. Thin. But real. She has a pulse, he whispered. Aya broke into a sob. She is alive. Alive, but fragile. He wrapped the baby quickly in the warmest towel they had. A corpsman rushed in with 2 flat stones wrapped in cloth, heated moments ago near a cooking fire. McDowell tucked them beside the baby to hold her temperature. He placed his palm lightly on her chest. Stay warm. Keep fighting. He turned back to Michiko. She was slipping further, her breath shallow, her skin paling. Too much blood lost. Too little time left. We must deliver the placenta, he said, and stop the bleeding before she crashes. Aya nodded through tears, holding Michiko's hand with both of hers. McDowell pressed firmly on the abdomen. Nothing. He tried again. A delayed contraction answered, faint but present, enough to guide the final stage. Outside, gunfire crackled along the distant ridge lines. Inside the tent, the world shrank to the soft, uneven breaths of 2 lives perched on the edge. McDowell wiped his glasses with the back of his wrist. Michiko, he murmured, stay with me. Your child is here. Do not leave her yet. He steadied his hands, ready to fight for her life again. The baby slept in fragile pulses, her chest rising in tiny flutters beneath the thin towels. The warm stones wrapped in cloth glowed faintly beside her, enough to keep her trembling skin from slipping into cold shock. Aya sat close, whispering soft encouragement in Japanese even though the infant could not hear or understand. It was not the words that mattered. It was the warmth. But the real danger was not the child. It was the mother. Michiko lay still, breath shallow and uneven. Her skin had turned a pale, sickly gray. Sweat gathered on her forehead despite the cool air inside the tent. When McDowell placed the back of his fingers on her cheek, the heat of the fever pulsed through him like a warning. Aya looked up quickly. Is she worse? She is developing an infection, McDowell said. Her uterus is contracting now, so the bleeding is under control. But the fever is rising. Aya's voice cracked. What does that mean? It means she does not have long before the infection spreads. Aya pressed her hands together, almost as if praying. Footsteps approached the tent flap. A corpsman stuck his head inside. Sir, Private Williams is asking for you again. The smell on his leg wound is stronger. He keeps calling for morphine. And for his mother. McDowell closed his eyes for a second. He could hear the boy's voice now, faint but desperate from the next tent. Doc, it hurts. Mama, please. The sound pressed on McDowell's chest like a physical weight. Williams, 19. Tall, raw-boned, always smiling when they had first arrived on the ridge. Gangrene had set into his calf 2 days ago. They had cleaned the wound. They had given him sulfa. They had hoped for supplies. But no more penicillin had arrived. The corpsman stepped inside fully, voice low. We have 3 doses left. Command says we save them for the boys who can walk out of here. Aya touched Michiko's arm. Doctor, please. McDowell felt himself pulled in 2 directions at once. He looked at Michiko's pale face, the fever rising behind her closed eyes. Then he looked toward the tent where Williams lay trembling, calling for a mother who was an ocean away. Sir, the corpsman whispered, if we do not give Williams a dose soon, he will lose the leg. And maybe his life. Aya's voice broke softly. She will die within hours without medicine. You know that. Look at her. McDowell did look. Her breaths were shallow, almost fluttering. Her pulse was rapid but weak, the pattern of a body fighting a losing battle. Her fever burned so fiercely he could feel it without touching her. She had survived 3 days in a collapsed cave, 3 days without air or water, 3 days of contractions. And now, with her child barely clinging to life, her own body was preparing to give up. He swallowed hard. Bring me 1 vial, he said. The corpsman stiffened. Sir, that leaves Williams with nothing. McDowell's jaw tightened. Williams is young and strong. He has a chance to hold on for 24 more hours. Michiko does not. The corpsman hesitated only a moment before leaving. The boy's voice drifted into the tent again. Doc, Mama, please. It hurts. Aya covered her mouth with her hand. The sound seemed to cut straight through her. When the corpsman returned, he held the vial like it was made of crystal. 1 dose, sir. McDowell took it. It felt too light for a decision this heavy. He prepared the syringe, his hand steady, but his chest tight. He leaned over Michiko. Michiko, I'm giving you medicine that may save your life. Your baby needs you. Stay here. Stay with us. Her eyelids did not open, but her fingers twitched weakly. He injected the penicillin slowly, watching the skin of her arm rise around the needle. When it was done, he pressed a cloth to the site and exhaled, a deep breath that did not lighten him. William's voice drifted again from the next tent. Doc, please. Please. Aya closed her eyes as if the sound physically hurt her. McDowell set the empty syringe aside. Bring me warm water, he said quietly. We need to keep her hydrated so the medicine can work. A medic handed him a canteen warmed near a cook fire. McDowell tilted it carefully, dripping water into Michiko's mouth 1 drop at a time, watching her throat for the faintest swallow. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Her fever did not break, but her breathing deepened slightly. Her pulse steadied by a fraction. Aya squeezed her hand. Michiko. You're still here. Stay, please. The baby stirred weakly beside the stones, giving a soft sound barely louder than a sigh. McDowell checked her again. Still alive. Still fighting. But Williams's voice, ragged and fading, crept under the canvas again. Doc. Mama. And McDowell felt the line he had crossed pulling at him, the weight of the boy he might lose in order to save the woman before him. Mother and child held on to life with fragile threads. And McDowell sat between them and the distant cries of a dying soldier, knowing he could save one life tonight. Maybe two, but not all. Night pressed down on the ridge like a heavy blanket. The triage tent flickered with the weak glow of a lantern, its light trembling across the canvas walls. Outside, the wind carried the low moans of wounded soldiers. Inside, Captain Thomas F. McDowell fought a quieter battle. Michiko slept in uneasy waves, her fever finally slowing but not breaking. Her breath rasped softly. Aya sat beside her, wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. The newborn lay in a wooden box lined with folded shirts. Warm stones wrapped in fabric hugged the sides, keeping her tiny body from losing heat. Even under the lantern light, the baby looked too small to belong to the world. McDowell crouched beside her. "She needs to eat," he murmured. Aya frowned. "But she cannot swallow yet. Too weak." "I know." He reached for his medical kit. Most tools were missing or rusted. Supplies were nearly gone. He rummaged until he found a thin rubber tube from an old, cracked IV set. Aya watched him. "What are you doing?" "Making a gavage tube," he said. "If she cannot eat on her own, I will feed her through her stomach." He boiled water in a mess tin over a small flame. When the tube softened, he coiled it around his fingers, checking flexibility. He washed his hands, then wrapped the end of the tube in cloth dipped in boiled water. He looked at Aya. "Hold her steady." Very gently, Aya cupped the baby's head with both hands, whispering in Japanese. McDowell threaded the tube into the infant's mouth. The baby twitched once, but remained limp, too weak to protest. He advanced the tube slowly down her esophagus. When it reached her stomach, he attached a tiny syringe filled with a thin mixture of canned milk and water. Aya held her breath as he pushed the plunger. Milk flowed through the tube. A moment later, the baby's chest lifted a little deeper. A faint color bloomed along her cheeks. Aya let out a soft cry. "She looks stronger." "Not strong," McDowell said. "Just alive." For a few seconds, hope warmed the tent. Then the flap burst open. A corpsman stumbled inside, breathless. Sir, it is Williams." McDowell froze. Aya stiffened. The corpsman continued, voice cracking. He started coughing black blood. "He is delirious. His pulse is fading fast." McDowell stood slowly. His hands shook. Aya whispered, "You should go." He stepped out into the night. The air outside was sharp and cold. Lanterns glowed dimly between tents, casting long shadows across the ground. The smell of iodine, sweat, and dirt mixed in the wind. When McDowell reached the next tent, he already knew. Williams lay half-curled on his cot. His eyes were open but glassy, staring at something far away. His breath rattled in his throat. Black-tinged froth stained the corner of his mouth. His skin had the gray cast of a boy whose body had stopped fighting. McDowell knelt slowly beside him. "Private," he said. "Can you hear me?" The boy did not answer. His lips moved around a soundless word. Maybe Mom. Maybe nothing at all. McDowell checked his pulse. Barely there. A few thin beats, like a thread pulling loose. Williams gasped once, then went still. The tent fell silent. McDowell closed the boy's eyes with 2 fingers. His throat tightened until he could hardly breathe. The smell of gangrene clung to everything. He sat there for a long moment, feeling the weight settle deep in his chest. The corpsman whispered, "Sir, there was nothing you could have done." McDowell did not answer. He stood, walked out of the tent, and returned to the triage shelter like a man walking through water. Inside, Aya looked up immediately. Her eyes widened when she saw his face. Michiko slept. The baby slept too, a faint blush of warmth across her cheeks. McDowell approached the makeshift crib. He stared at the infant for a long time. The tube lay beside her, coiled like a thin lifeline. Her breaths were shallow but steady. Aya whispered, "Was it the boy?" McDowell nodded once. She lowered her head in silence. He sank onto the crate beside the baby. His hands hovered above her, unable to touch, unable to retreat. Williams was 19, he said quietly. He had a chance. A real one. His voice cracked. I told myself he could wait. I told myself she was running out of time. Maybe I lied to make the choice easier. Aya rested a hand on his sleeve. You chose life, Captain. McDowell shook his head. No. I traded one life for another. He leaned in, staring at the tiny rising chest of the newborn girl. Little one, he whispered, voice trembling. You have to live. You hear me. You have to. Because the price for your heartbeat tonight was a boy's life. He closed his eyes. And I cannot carry that weight alone. 3 days later, the ridge looked almost gentle under the gray morning sky. The worst of the fever had passed, leaving Michiko exhausted but present, her eyes clearer each time she woke. The triage tent felt different now, too. Less like a battlefield, more like a fragile corner of borrowed peace. McDowell stood beside her cot, checking her pulse. It was stronger today. Steadier. Aya held the newborn close, wrapped in layers of cloth and warmed stones. She slept 2 hours, Aya said softly. A good sign. Michiko reached out both hands. Aya placed the infant in her arms. The baby's breath fluttered weakly against her skin. Her face, once a bluish haze of uncertainty, had begun to pink in the center of each cheek. Michiko stared at her daughter for a long moment. I will name her, she whispered. Kibo. Aya smiled. Hope. McDowell repeated the name under his breath as if testing its weight. Hope Hayashi. Michiko nodded faintly, eyes shining but dry. She had cried enough in the dark hours. Now she simply held the child as though she were holding a sunrise. For the first time since the cave, the world felt like it might allow them another day. Weeks blurred into a rhythm. The battles raged farther north, and more wounded came through the triage line, but in a small corner of the tent, a different war was being fought, one of inches, grams, breaths. McDowell taught Michiko how to sterilize the improvised feeding tube over boiling water. Let it cool before you use it, he said. Test it on your wrist first. Warm, not hot. Aya translated, though Michiko often understood without needing words. Her hands were steadier each time she threaded the tube, each time she held the baby upright afterward. Hope gained weight in slow, almost invisible victories. 1 ounce, then another. Her skin grew less translucent. Her breaths came deeper. The soldiers began stopping by the corner where the child slept. Lucky little bean, one said. Look at her, tougher than the rest of us, another murmured. Even the hardest voices softened when they passed. At night, McDowell sat with Aya and Michiko in quiet intervals between emergencies. Sometimes he hummed under his breath old Chicago melodies he barely remembered. Sometimes Aya told stories in Japanese that Michiko listened to with a small smile, though McDowell caught only fragments. For 3 weeks, the three of them became something the war had no name for. Not a family. Not quite strangers. Something in between, bound by a child who was never meant to survive. The order came on a hot, dusty afternoon. All Japanese civilians are to be transferred to Camp Koza for processing. Transport departs in 30 minutes. McDowell froze when he heard it. Aya's face drained of color. Captain, they are moving everyone. Michiko tightened her arms around the sleeping infant. No, she whispered. Not now. Not when she is still so small. McDowell felt the words hit him harder than any artillery blast. He wanted to argue. He wanted to demand exceptions. He wanted to go with them. But orders were orders, and the war cared nothing for the small world they had made together. He stepped away, hands shaking, rummaging through his supply chest. When he returned, he held a small canvas pouch. "What is this?" Aya asked. McDowell knelt beside Michiko. "It's everything I can give you." He opened the pouch. Inside lay the gavage tube clean, coiled, irreplaceable. A folded cloth wrap. A small tin of powdered milk he had stolen from the officer's mess. And a strip of cotton he had boiled, dried, and kept in his pocket for days without knowing why. Michiko stared at the items as if they were treasures from another world. McDowell closed her fingers around the pouch. "Every 3 hours," he said quietly. "Keep her warm. Even when she sweats, don't let her cool. If she stops breathing, stimulate her feet. Do not wait." His voice thickened. "And whatever happens, make William's sacrifice matter." Aya bowed her head. Michiko pressed the pouch to her chest, tears finally spilling. When the truck engine rumbled outside, a soldier called, "Last boarding." "Move." McDowell lifted Hope one more time, feeling the tiny weight settle into his hands. She blinked up at him, her gaze unfocused but alive. He brushed a thumb across her cheek, memorizing the warmth of it. "Live, little one," he whispered. "That's all I want from you." He placed her gently in Michiko's arms. Aya helped her climb onto the back of the truck. The engine growled. Dust swirled in the sunlight. Michiko turned, holding Hope tight, eyes locked on McDowell. She tried to speak, but the engine drowned the words. The truck pulled away. McDowell stood in the settling dust long after it disappeared down the road, one hand still holding the remaining half of the twin rubber tube, the half he had kept, without realizing until now, as proof that the bond had been real. The afternoon sun slanted across the stone courtyard of the Okinawa Prefectural Peace Memorial Museum, turning the sea beyond Itomen a steely silver. Waves rolled against the cliffs where thousands had once died, their echoes carried by the wind. Visitors moved quietly through the exhibits, as if the island itself demanded lowered voices. Near the back gallery, where the displays grew smaller and more personal, a woman in her early 50s stood alone before a glass case. "Dr. Hope K." Hayashi adjusted her glasses and leaned closer. Inside the case rested a yellowed rubber catheter, coiled gently on a linen pad. One end was cracked. The surface was faintly brittle, hardened by time. A placard lay beneath it. Improvised feeding tube used to sustain a premature infant on the Mabuni Ridge, July 1945. Donated by the Hayashi family, 1996. Hope exhaled slowly. There she was again, the newborn, who should never have lived, staring up at her from the faint reflection on the glass. There was the ridge. The stones warmed by fire. The American doctor who had traded a boy's life for hers. She closed her eyes, and memory rose like mist over the cliffs. Okinawa, summer 1945. Camp Koza had been chaos. Tents pitched on broken ground, nurses shouting orders in English, Japanese civilians waiting in long lines for ration cards. But Michiko kept her focus on the tiny life cupped against her chest. Hope survived each night only because Michiko fed her through the catheter McDowell had given her every 3 hours, no matter how exhausted she was. She boiled water. She sterilized stones. She held the baby upright until the milk settled. Sometimes she whispered McDowell's instructions out loud, like prayers. When repatriation began, Michiko returned to Osaka with nothing but a ration blanket, a scrap of rice, and the rubber tube sewn inside her sleeve, her talisman, her proof that the enemy had shown mercy when the world had none left. Hope grew slowly, quietly, stubbornly, and in every story Michiko told her daughter, there was always a man on a ridge, holding a lantern and a life that was not his. Chicago, 1952. Hope remembered the door opening before her mother even knocked. McDowell stood frozen, unable to speak. Then he knelt. "You made it," he whispered. Hope was small, 5 years old, shy, clutching her mother's skirt. But she remembered the warmth in his voice, the trembling in his hands as he touched her hair. He brought out a small wooden box. Inside lay the second half of the rubber catheter cleaned, wrapped in cloth, kept in his drawer for 7 years. Michiko wept when she saw it. "You saved her," she said. "No," McDowell answered. "You did. I just refused to let the war decide for her." Hope didn't understand the words then. She would later. Much later. America, 1995. The snowstorm that morning made Chicago look like a world erased in white. Hope found him in a quiet veterans' nursing home, the air smelling faintly of antiseptic and winter coats. He was 92. Frail, but his eyes were still sharp when they opened. "Hope," he breathed. She took his hand, feeling the tremor, not weakness, but memory. "I became a pediatrician," she whispered. "Because of you." He blinked back tears he no longer had the strength to hide. "I always believed you would." She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket. She placed something in his hand. A photograph of Williams, the boy he had lost, the boy he had never forgotten. McDowell's face crumpled. He pressed the photo to his chest. "Thank you," he whispered. He died 2 days later. The photograph of Williams and a picture of Michiko holding baby Hope tucked together in the drawer beside his bed. Okinawa, 1996. Now, standing before the museum display, Hope lifted her hand and touched the glass lightly. Behind the reflection of her own face, she saw the ridge where she had been born into the world too early, wrapped in cloth and desperation. She saw McDowell leaning over her mother. She saw Aya whispering encouragement. She saw Williams, a shadow at the edge of the scene, giving up more than he ever knew. A group of students paused nearby. One boy pointed at the rubber catheter. "That old thing saved a baby?" he asked. Hope turned, offering a gentle smile. "It did," she said. "But not because it was special. Because a man believed a life was worth saving. Even an enemy's child." The boy nodded slowly, as if something inside him shifted. Hope faced the exhibit again. The sea roared softly outside the museum walls. She whispered, "I lived, Captain. I lived well. And I never forgot the cost." She stepped away, letting the afternoon light wash over the case over the brittle tube that had once been the thin, fragile bridge between life and death. Sometimes the smallest objects carry the heaviest echoes of war. If stories like this remind you of the humanity still hidden in the darkest corners of history, stay with us. There are more untold voices waiting to be heard.